From the Parthenon of Ictinos and Callicrates to Sir Christopher Wren's St. Paul's Cathedral, great works of architecture have ensured their designers a place in history. But there have also been architects who became famous precisely for their buildings that were never built. One of the most fascinating examples of this is the 18th century French architect Étienne-Louis Boullée. As a teacher and theorist, he developed a distinctive style of abstract geometric forms, and at the end of his life, in the 1780s and 90s, produced a series of designs illustrating his ideas. Making up an almost encyclopedic representation of the necessary institutions for an ideal state, they were often of such a vast scale that they would have been impossible to build in real life. But their visionary nature has earned him his place in history, and still inspires architects today. Boullée was a reluctant architect. Born in Paris in 1728, he originally dreamt of becoming a painter, but at his father's insistence turned to the more practical profession of architecture. Having finished his studies under Jacques-François Blondel in 1746, he went on to have a successful career as a designer of country and city houses in and around Paris, although only one of these, the Hôtel Alexandre, still exists. It was rather as a theorist and a teacher that he achieved lasting influence. He was a member of the Royal Academy of Architecture and worked as a professor for over 50 years of his life, influencing many great architects of his day. In this position, he could explore his art freely, drawing up designs that were unrestrained by budgets or by the wishes of clients, who in his opinion rarely understood the genius of architects and had led the profession to lag behind other arts in its development. Through his beautifully rendered imaginary projects, Boullée could return to his love for painting and explore ideas about architecture. His goal was to create buildings that would instinctively make us feel in a way that corresponded to their nature or purpose, and that would shape moral values in the public. To this end, he sought to discover the properties of volumes and their precise emotional effects on humans. This allowed him to go beyond merely copying the ancients and create new building types that sometimes had little or no precedent in the past. At the very end of his career, Boullée wrote down his theories in a book called Essay on the Art of Architecture, in which he also explained his various designs, beginning with a project for a basilica. To be reduced to what is called necessity when designing a temple is to forget one's subject. This is what Boullée wrote in his essay, and his design for a basilica is of a suitably awesome scale. According to him, the mere sight of a temple to God or the Supreme Being should induce a sense of veneration and inspire profound respect, astonishment, and wonder. Had it been possible, he writes, it should appear to be the very universe itself. And what better way to produce this effect than through size? Size is inevitably allied with beauty, he claims, because even a volcano breathing fire and death inspires admiration and has a repulsive beauty. But it's not enough for a building to just be big, it also has to look big, an effect that is achieved by the choice and arrangement of its parts. For example, he makes use of columns, in his opinion the most magnificent part of architecture, to hide the supporting structure necessary to hold up the dome and vaulting, and increases their impact by extending them until their end is out of sight, and using immense rows of delicate columns instead of gigantic ones that would only make the space look smaller. Finally, light is channeled into the building through hidden casements, adding to a sense of mystery, and can be adjusted at will to provide the appropriate emotional impacts to visitors depending on the occasion. A similar sense of awe and wonder was the goal of this project for a monument to the Supreme Being, consisting of a domed building fronted by a grand portico and surrounded by terraces and sub-temples set in a dramatic mountainous landscape. The theatre is one of Boullée's more modest designs and one that he actually hoped to get built on the Place du Carrousel in central Paris. This site, he argued, would provide for easy access both by river and through adjacent streets, and the courtyards of the nearby Tuileries Palace could be used as parking space for carriages. It was supposed to be a freestanding building and designed as a monument to pleasure. He found an appropriate form to express this in the sphere, which he considered to be the most pleasing of all shapes, and surrounded it with Corinthian columns, the most elegant of the classical orders. On the inside we find a semicircular auditorium with spherical vaulting above it to provide good acoustics. Furthermore, the solid structure of the building isolates it from any outside noise. Great attention has also been given to avoiding the risk of fires breaking out, something that was all too common in early theatres. The building is almost entirely made of stone and brick, with only the floor and scenery consisting of flammable material. But even if these were to catch on fire, a reservoir of water has been placed beneath them into which the burning planks would fall and be extinguished. The architect also provided an ample number of escape routes so that practically everyone could evacuate the building at once. Boulée boasted that if the theatre got built, he would, at his own risk, ignite a floor and a set of scenery to demonstrate the security of his design. The outside decoration of a palace must be rich, noble, elegant, and above all, majestic. To achieve this in his Palace for the Sovereign, Boulée once again turned to an enormous scale. He decided to enclose the main building with the palaces of the court nobles, creating a grand complex designed as a consistent whole. He believed that the key to beauty in architecture was a balance between regularity, symmetry, and variety, and tried to accomplish this by using the site of the building to his advantage. Located in the hilly terrain of Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris, he placed the buildings on different heights to create variety without sacrificing the other desired qualities. He also made a proposal for the complete remodeling of the Palace of Versailles. Writing his essay on the art of architecture during the French Revolution, he felt the need to excuse the inclusion of these projects by noting that the book wasn't written only for a French audience, and that the designs could be useful as inspiration for other types of monuments. The Palace of Justice, by contrast, was completely compatible with the new French Republic. It was conceived as a grand structure because, quote, the dwelling place of the throne of justice must be very imposing. But to clearly distinguish it from other palaces and show its function, Boulée turned to architectural poetry, or what later became known as architecture parlante, speaking architecture. The palace was laid out as a courthouse placed on top of a prison, turning it into one enormous metaphor for crime overwhelmed by the weight of justice. In his National Palace, Boulée instead expressed its function by using the walls to proclaim France's constitutional laws in plain writing. At their base, he placed 2 rows of figures representing the provinces of the country. An attic on top of the building was decorated with a bas-relief showing national festivals, and crowning the entire palace is a statue representing freedom. The municipal palace would be used by district magistrates, but was also intended as a communal house, a place where the public could have their voices heard. An austere facade is meant to symbolize the, quote, virile character suitable to republicans, and entrances have been placed all along it, facilitating the entry and exit of large numbers of people. Guard posts placed at the 4 angles of the building's foundations are meant to proclaim metaphorically that the forces of public order are the basis of society. Following an attempt to improve on the design of the Colosseum in Rome, Boulée ended up creating a new building that dwarfs its ancient predecessor and anticipates the modern stadium. He believed that the building type of the ancient amphitheater should be revived in the modern era to serve as the venue for national festivals. Previously, festivals in Paris could only be enjoyed by a fraction of the population because of a lack of space, but in his new Colosseum, as many as 300,000 people could gather at once. That's half the city's population at the time, and more than twice the seating capacity of the largest stadium on Earth today. This gigantic building was imagined as standing in the Étoile, the place where the Arc de Triomphe was later built. The reason for constructing it would have been the perceived moral benefits that national festivals would have on the people. Boullée, as he put it, wanted to reinstate morality through the lure of pleasure. The Colosseum could be used for various sports like chariot racing and to practice military maneuvers. It was also thought of as a place where paintings and models of building projects could be presented to the public, and where prizes could be awarded to different academies or to the hard-working farmer, recognizing in the midst of public acclaim his toil and virtue. Designed to withstand the ravages of war, military architecture is above all practical. But Boullée wanted to infuse it with the same kind of architectural poetry found in his civic buildings. His city gates were intended above all to give an impression of strength. They're made to look as sturdy as possible, and in this case he has placed statues of warriors on a stylobate at the bottom to remind any potential attacker that although the walls may be tall and imposing, what they should really be worried about are the inhabitants behind them. In another one, he piled up cannonballs at the base, surmounted by the armor of giant warriors, and used gun barrels to decorate the arched entrance. Interior walls, on the other hand, were made to reassure the citizens of their safety, being decorated in such a way that there seems to be 2 layers. He also designed a fort consisting of a round structure with 4 towers connected to it. The gaps between them are blocked with stacks of cannonballs, and in front of the building stands a giant shield of Achilles. Of all the imaginary buildings that Boullée designed, the most common type was perhaps not surprisingly the one with the least practical requirements, and that had the most to do with poetry: the funerary monument. Built to perpetuate the memory of the dead, these structures had to survive through the ages, and a good precedent to look back to was of course the pyramids of ancient Egypt, resembling mountains both in their form and durability. But not content to merely copy the old, he also added some new inventions to the genre. First of these was to use heavy forms and make them appear to be partially buried. When we imagine the complete shape in our minds, we can feel its weight on our shoulders and also get a sense of the dark ground below. In this way, he conveyed death through an emotional response to form. Some of his designs contribute to the debate in the closing decades of the 18th century over the creation of public cemeteries on the outskirts of towns, both as a hygienic measure to close overcrowded parish churchyards and to create moralizing landscapes where monuments could recall exemplary public figures and the sentiments of remembering the dead could be cultivated. Here, he has placed a funerary monument to a great general at the center of a vast complex, surrounded by walls into which are built chapels and charnel houses where the bones of the dead could be stored. A pyramidal-shaped gate leads you into the grounds, and inside the main monument is a large spherical room. His second invention was what he called the architecture of shadows. Walking through a moonlit forest one night, he recalls how he was struck by the strong sense of melancholy produced in him by the shadows of the trees, something that he decided to try to recreate in architecture. The result was a somber monument made up of a flat, unadorned surface, its only decoration consisting of a play of shadows. These ideas about funerary monuments would be combined to create the most famous of all of his buildings. With the cenotaph for Isaac Newton, Boullée set out to honor the 17th century scientist by imagining a memorial that responded to the near hero worship that had grown up in the half-century since Newton's death. His reverence for the scientist can be seen in the description of the project, writing, quote, "Sublime mind, prodigious and profound genius, O Newton, with the range of your intelligence and the sublime nature of your genius, you have defined the shape of the earth. I have conceived the idea of enveloping you in your discovery." The cenotaph takes on the simple, unadorned shape of a sphere, buried within a 3-tiered cylindrical base. Each level is planted with flowers and cypress trees associated with mourning in the ancient world. These forests appear like hedges compared to the size of the whole building, which rises taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Entering the monument through a long dark tunnel, you arrive in an inverted world. In daytime, the only sources of light in the vast hollow sphere are tiny holes piercing through the vaulting, laid out to correspond to the stars and planets in the sky. This gives the impression that Newton's tomb, the only material object we can perceive, is floating in the vastness of space. At night, on the other hand, light radiates from an enormous lantern suspended at the center of the sphere. Another of his most famous projects was his planned expansion of the Royal Library. In this case, he took a pragmatic approach, transforming an existing courtyard into a vaulted hall with tiers of bookshelves that could easily be used without the need for ladders. Intended to give a grand and noble impression, the design was inspired by the famous fresco of the School of Athens, painted by Raphael. An earlier project for a freestanding public library near the Place Vendôme was deemed too expensive to have any hope of being built. It would have been entered through a semicircular courtyard and consisted of long galleries stretching from a central point, allowing for easy service and surveillance of visitors. Among his designs was also that of a museum, which, like the public library, was a new building type in the 18th century. Turning again to an enormous scale, he centered the building around a Hall of Fame, intended to contain the statues of great men. He also made attempts at triumphal arches, one integrating a large colonnade and another based on the form of a pyramid. The design for a bridge across the river Seine was a clear example of speaking architecture, its piers being made in the shape of boats that could have been used to cross the river. Finally, the architect, famous for his grandiose designs, even made his own reconstruction of the Tower of Babel, taking the form of a pure cone on a cubic base with a trail of figures winding in a spiral hand in hand to the top, a symbol of hope for the restitution of a common language and a unified people. When Étienne-Louis Boullée died in 1799, he still hadn't published his essay on the art of architecture. His passing went almost unnoticed, and to the extent that he was remembered, it was as a teacher, supporting his students like a father, wrote one biographer. His drawings remained largely unremarked on by scholars for nearly a century and a half before being rediscovered in the 1900s. Boullée's work began to attract the attention of art historians in the 20s, and the essay was finally published and translated into English in 1953. In his desire to create a unique, original architecture appropriate to an ideal new social order, Boullée anticipated similar concerns in the 20th century, and his works inspired generations of architects of the post-war period. Today, he is recognized as one of the most visionary architects of the 18th century.